Hello, movie and entertainment fans, and welcome back to the Calvin Cam podcast, where we tackle all sorts of topics in the film, television, and video game world. I'm Calvin, and today we have another episode review for HBO's The Last of Us. So get comfortable and let's unpack episode 3, Long, Long Time. I realize in doing these episodes, I have yet to give a spoiler warning. So here it is. Moving forward, if you have not seen the show, go catch up so you cannot be spoiled by everything in these episodes. Now, episode 3, titled Long, Long Time, was probably one of the greatest episodes that I've ever seen in television, period. Absolutely tear-jerking. I was crying my eyes out, and I couldn't go to bed because I kept thinking about what I just saw. The episode perfectly encapsulates what The Last of Us is about. The Last of Us is and always has been a story about love, and how love is so powerful and such a great thing, but on the other side of the coin, love can be awful. It's about sacrifice and pain and loss with the people we are attached to and hold on so dearly to our hearts and our lives. And this show shows us as viewers and fans the perfect way to adapt one medium into another. When this episode aired, there was amazing reviews across the board. I believe it's sitting at a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was almost at 100% on IMDb. But shortly after, the toxic part of the internet came creeping in, and of course, we got some terrible backlash from people who just cannot get with the times. So it's unfortunate to see that. However, the episode still is holding strong with all of its critical reviews, etc. And for people who've been bashing on it because it's not necessarily like the game, people need to keep in mind that this is an adaptation. Things are going to be different, and it seems like the creators are taking a much more intimate and emotional route approaching this story. If you don't like the show, just go play the game over and over again. It's that easy. I think that between the game and the show, each one are equally great. There's no this one's better than that one or that one's better than this one. They both are telling the same story, just in different ways. Now I want to talk about who this episode is centered around, Bill and Frank. It's wonderful to see Bill and Frank's characters and story more fleshed out than it was in the game. Not to mention the actors behind the characters giving us some of the best performances I've seen in TV. Nick Offerman is amazing and never fails to surprise me on how he is such a great actor and how he can play such dramatic roles. You know, coming from Parks and Rec, being Ron Swanson, being hilarious, and he delivers that serious version of comedy. And Maury Bartlett, who I have more recently started loving from his character Armand in The White Lotus Season 1. He's the best part of the show, and every second he was on screen, my attention was there. He stole the show for me. So Bill and Frank's relationship in the game is only really vaguely talked about. In fact, we don't get to meet Frank alive at all. In the game, Bill has a whole town under lockdown, rigged with traps and explosives, but instead of that, he has a small area of like a street or two, which is more manageable, and Bill is more focused on having his house and his own little fortress safe and secure. He's more or less happy because he was a very closed off guy prior to the pandemic, and now that everyone's gone, he's like, finally, I'm in my element. And it's funny to see just little things with Bill's characters, like there's a nod at Parks and Rec, actually, where Ron Swanson is eating dinner and he's watching, I believe, like a train go off the tracks and like fall. And there's kind of like a nod to that where Bill is eating his dinner and he is watching a infected get killed by a trap. So it's a couple cool parallels and comparisons. Bill was so ready for the pandemic to happen, he didn't account for falling in love with somebody, and that kind of puts a whole spin on Bill's character, and you really get to see the development that he shows. Now, Joel and Ellie have a quest with Bill in the game to retrieve the car battery. When we finally find the battery, we also find a very not alive Frank, who had hung himself after getting bitten. Game Bill then explains to Joel, "That was my partner," and hints at a romance between them. Other than that, if you're a collector for items in video games, you're able to find a note from Frank that reads, "Well, Bill, I doubt you'd ever find this note because you were too scared to ever make it in this part of town. But if for some reason you did, I want you to know I hated your guts. I grew tired of this shitty town and your set in arms ways attitude. I wanted more from life than this, and you could never get that." In the show, they have a nod at the note by giving the couple an argument about Bill being paranoid and afraid and Frank wanting more out of their life together. These are great ways to adapt elements from a game into a movie, giving more fleshed out characters and giving us, the viewers, and a wider audience, because not everybody plays video games, the chance to experience these relationships more fleshed out. Now, let's jump back to the beginning of this episode. We have our first real time with Joel and Ellie, because at the heart of this story, it is about Joel learning to deal with the loss of his daughter and having to deal with that trauma, while learning to open up his heart again with Ellie and their journey across the United States. So as we've seen with their time together so far, Joel remains closed off and distant with her, and we finally get to see him open up a little and engage in smaller conversation that expands through the episode. This kind of parallels with Bill meeting Frank. Bill is a closed off person who's been closed off before the pandemic, and he is learning to open up his heart and letting somebody in and finding someone to care about. We also get one of our first real close-up encounters with one of the infected. At the building that Joel and Ellie stop into to get some supplies that Joel hid a couple years back, Ellie goes off and searches for supplies, and she runs into a stalker, an infected who is more overtaken than a runner, but not quite a clicker. Yeah, definitely not a boomer. It's crushed and stuck under some collapsed rubble, and besides getting bit, this is Ellie's first real time up close with an infected. And I gotta say that the makeup for these guys are terrific. The makeup team on the show has not disappointed yet, and the use of practical effects have made the immersion into the world more than believable. When Ellie even cuts the skin of the stalker and it opens up and you see the fungus inside, it all looks so good. And we also get to see Ellie show a different kind of emotion here. She becomes angry and somewhat hateful. And for those of you who have played the game, then you know that Ellie lost her best friend by infection. And you can really see the hate when Ellie kills the stalker. Ellie and Joel both have emotional baggage that they need to reroute. After grabbing the supplies and continuing on their journey, we get to see a really cool example of humanity. Joel and Ellie stumble upon a crashed airplane, and then shortly after they find a pile of remains from non-infected people who were disposed of by Fedra. One showing the incredible heights we can achieve as humanity, like flying, the other showing how low humanity can sink. And then soon we come across a great conversation that I'm happy was talked about, which is how the pandemic came to be. Ellie asks Joel what really happened, because Ellie knew that the things that she was taught in school by Fedra was most likely not true. Joel goes on to explain that it was indeed the mutated cordyceps reaching the food supply, and with a globalized economy, food was able to greatly spread around the world in days, and that's why the world started to end all at once. People get sick, people die, people change, etc. He even hints at the pancake mix, like from the first episode, which is a really neat callback. I don't remember the outbreak talked about too much in the video game, so it's nice to see that they're giving explanation on the origins of the outbreak throughout the show in each episode, usually at the beginning of each episode. So as the show continues, I'm looking forward to seeing what new information we, the viewers, are going to see and how different that's going to be with the game. And that's what makes me like this show so much more. Like I said before, that it's seeing the differences really between the game and the show. And that's what makes the show version of The Last of Us so special, is we get to have these in-depth explanations of not only the world but the characters versus the game. You know, in the game you're kind of on rails and you're going behind Joel the entire time. It's third person shooter and it's more actiony, and the show allows it to be a little bit more grounded and more real and personal. It allows us to connect with our characters more and feel for them. So that being said, let's jump back over to a part of the episode where we see Tess and Joel meeting Frank and Bill and how their relationship together is formed. That's something that's not explored in the game, and we get to see it unfold. It's cool because Frank obviously wanted friends, and he had been talking to Tess over the radio, and it was very great to see that he had made a real connection with somebody else in this world. Now, if you remember in the Fedra zone in Boston, they would use the radio to communicate. There was a long line in the hallway of people trying to reach out for whoever's out there. So now we know that Frank and Tess were able to connect over the long distance and finally meet up. And it's so funny to see that, like, Frank and Tess have such a similar thing, and Bill and Joel are very similar too. It's another cool aspect of their friendship forming. And during their meetups, we start to see the relationship between Joel and Tess get a little more fleshed out as well. We don't necessarily see Joel ever call Tess his girlfriend or whatever, but we now know that in this episode, Joel did indeed love Tess. And the loss of Tess impacted Joel heavily as well. But Joel has dealt with that kind of traumatic loss before, that he kind of knew how to bury it and move on. And that's what he's trying to do with Ellie. And Ellie even mentions in the episode, like, this isn't my fault that you're taking me. Like, this is your choice to take me. But Ellie does feel like it is her fault that what happened to Tess happened. And that's all a part of their character growth. Now that there is a relationship built between Bill, Tess, Joel, and Frank, we get to see towards the end of this episode a scene that shocked me, actually. I actually thought that Bill was going to die, which is completely different than the game, but I was like, they're really going to change this up right now. So Bill's going to die, Frank's going to live, and that would be an insane change. But that didn't happen. Bill lived, and Frank also lived. That was the big change. Frank developed cancer, I believe. It looked like some form of deterioration without a cure, and possibly leads to the best part of the episode, in my eyes, was the end. The ending of Frank and Bill. Their one last day together, how sweet it was. Frank telling Bill that this is what I want. We've lived a life and this is how I want to go. I want to control how I lead. And Bill not being able to let go of Frank because Bill's purpose in life was Frank. And now that's gone. So Bill and Frank spend their whole day together doing the sweetest things, and it had me in tears, and they ended their lives together. They crushed up some pills, stuck it in the wine, slept, and died. It was such a tragic, sweet ending for their story. And it was also interesting to see that when Joel and Ellie arrive, we get a note from Bill, and that's kind of a nod to the note in the game that Frank leaves Bill. But this note is to Joel from Bill. Bill goes on to explain that he left Joel everything. He has all of his guns, all of his supplies, the batteries for the truck and the truck itself, everything. And in the scene, we get to see Ellie kind of have some fun and be like, holy shit, look at all these guns. Like, can I have one, basically? She ends up stealing one. So I'm sure that we'll get that scene from the game where Joel finds out that she has a gun. And in this scene also, There's straight up dialogue lifted from the game between Ellie and Joel about leaving Tess out of it. Like, don't mention Tess. And this is one of the first times we get to see Joel actually grieve. He takes the letter when Ellie's reading it, and she mentions Tess because Bill wrote about Tess. And he walks outside and he has to ponder, and he crushes the note and takes a deep breath and realizes he has to move on and that he loves Tess. And so he will see this mission out for her. Little does Joel know that he's about to pretty much adopt a new daughter and cherish a love that's so strong between two people. So, all in all, I thought this episode was a perfect episode. Cannot wait to see what the rest of the show has to offer. If they keep pumping out episodes like this, I could easily say that this is probably one of the greatest shows ever created. And that's perfect because it goes along with The Last of Us game being one of the best video game stories ever created. And that's where I'll conclude this episode review. I can't wait to get to the end of the show and do a complete and total episode of the whole season. And that's going to be really fun to break down. I'm planning something huge, so get ready for that. These are short and sweet reviews. So if you like them, be sure to look forward to seeing that one. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Calvin Camp Podcast. It means so much to me that you're showing your support by listening in. Please go follow me on Instagram and Twitter and catch the show on all other audio streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Music, Google, Amazon, and also my YouTube channel, The Calvin Cam. Head on over there and hit that subscribe button and ring that bell for notifications. You won't be disappointed. Help the show grow so I can deliver you better content. And with that being said, have a good day, everyone. We'll catch you next time.